And you know, people that were community-minded, they didn't care. They said, oh, if we can just sit here and watch, we're good. We shut down for the day. Others said, well, how much can we get out of it? Now, that leads into what happened at the end of the film. This is, I believe, the first Bond film that doesn't say at the end credits, thanks to the community for their help and all this, because the community took advantage of Eon Productions in making this film, financially, very much so. I digress, you'll hear more about that, but then you do have Felix and Bond in harnesses where they're coming down in front of the church. I mean, that's how they did it. You see the crane. You don't see the crane in the film, but there it is. That's how it was done. Sorry, but that's the movie night. And this was a full-day shoot at this church. And the pastor of the church, he was the real pastor of the church. A lot of the kids in the church scene, they were all sheriff's deputies' kids in the scene. They were all there. It was a lot of fun. I gained a lot of points, but I lost a lot at the end, and you'll see why. Let's see here. I apologize, I do have some of the pictures in here a couple times, just because I didn't have a whole lot of time to edit.
So the guys that parachuted in?
Yeah. Stop.
There was something like you guys took down like power lines. Yeah. There were a lot of power lines around that church, right?
We had to cut them all down for the day. That was part of closing the stores. We had to tell them, power's being cut for the day, the lines are going to be cut down to make it easier to film and all this. How much do you want? And that's, most people there didn't take advantage, but a lot of people did, and the Keys were notorious for that, sorry to say. Remember where we lassoed the plane from the Coast Guard helicopter? You're seeing it right there. That's on the Coast Guard base. You can't see much of it because I don't have a picture, but if you look on the tail of that plane, you see somebody sitting up there, it's being lassoed. I don't know if you can see it good on that, probably not. But,
yeah, you can see it.
Right there. The plane's being lassoed from the helicopter by Bond, sitting at the Coast Guard base.
The plane's actually not on something on the ground, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now they did fly, they did tow the plane. They towed it. It's an empty shell, and it was towed for filming. There was nobody attached to it. There was nobody hanging on it, but they did film it going across. That was the shirt I was eventually given, which I still have, and sorry to say it does not fit me anymore. It would probably fit my son, though I don't think he'd wear it. Sadly, my kids were not very excited about Bond until later on. Actually, I had no kids when this was filmed, but later on. There's Robert Dobby and Frank McRae, Sharky. This was at the Coast Guard base, and if you look sitting down in front of where it says Superstar Transport, you recognize anybody sitting there? No? You see somebody else? Maybe. I'll show you here. Cubby Rock.
Yeah, let's take it.
He always came out and he just watched. It was very rare for him to say anything or do anything. He just watched everything. That's all he had to do. He came out to watch.
You didn't get a shot, you put handcuffs on Sanchez, or did you?
No, I didn't, but there I am, where they're taking Sanchez out. Okay?
So were you actually in it?
Yeah.
You guys to watch it?
Well, in this area here, you'll see me. I did get a speaking part, and I was going to get to that after we do this, but I'll go into it. A lot of the filming was, the filming places I was at, basically, when I was in Key West for the filming, I was there basically just to hang out for the day and eat with them. They had food truck. In the month I worked for them, I gained 17 pounds. And every morning I had breakfast at the food truck with the crew and the cast. I had lunch with them, and then at night, I was to take the Broccolis, and whichever of the stars wanted to go out to a nice restaurant for dinner, I was to escort them quietly, because I was still an officer, I was still armed, and they wanted somebody with them. So I got to bring my girlfriend at the time to all these restaurants we couldn't afford to eat and have dinner with them, which was pretty cool. Of course, back then, no phones, no cameras, there's not many photos. And it's just one of those things that when it's happening, you're not thinking about it, and afterwards you're going, oh yeah, I can't believe I didn't do that. Just when we were filming, I had cameras with me all the time, otherwise I didn't really, maybe I felt bad about it. You know, these people are having their own time. There's a lot of different things going through your mind.
Yeah.
But all this was at the Coast Guard base. And remember the rogue agent? Anybody tell me his name?
Kilifer.
Well, the guy I'm in this picture with, he ran the pool supply shop in Key West. Okay, and he came in, he was in the film. And we're sitting in the car with Kilifer for quite an amount of time during the takes in between. So he starts this conversation with him and says, hey, we found out his wife was here with him in town, and she's also an actress. They at the time were doing a lot of Broadway things. He says, hey, would you guys like to come to my house for Sunday? We'll have a barbecue at the pool. And I'm looking at him like, are you kidding me? You're asking this guy if he wants it? And he turns around and says, yeah, that'd be wonderful. So my friend Paul and his wife and my girlfriend and I and Kilifer and his wife had a barbecue at my friend's pool that Sunday. I was like, couldn't believe it. It was just like they were just average people and having a great time off of the set. And it was really a lot of fun. But I was telling him when he asked him, I said, are you out of your mind? He said, hey, they could say no. They didn't. Let's see. The guy at the far left, his name was Joe Culligan. He passed away a couple years ago. This guy was so busy at Miami Film all the time. He was on the cover of the Sunday magazine Tropic that we have down there. He always got in commercials, he got in shows, and he encouraged me to participate further. And I was interested, but I had a day job. And you know that old thing, don't quit your day job? Yeah, well, I knew I wasn't quitting my day job. But we keep going. And let's see, so we're filming up and down. This is the wave crest. It was put in a point called Snipes Point, which is a popular place for Key West people to go on weekends with their boats and hang out. Certain times of the day you get a sandbar, up, and you can hang out there. Then if you're not careful, the sandbar's gone, and you're just floating around. I went out there one day. Actually, the day I went out there, I just had nothing to do, so I just went out there on the boat. That's really what happened. I just had nothing to do. So I did that.
Again, my name is John Flynn. I've been writing for 30 plus years. I was a dean for 32 years. I retired and now I write full time. And my agent was here with us earlier today. I've written 18 books. She's responsible for a lot of those books. And I now write a series about a female James Bond. And I hope you have the chance to, pick up the book and read it and become fans of my books now as well. This particular panel is going to be about men's couture, but from the spectrum of what Bond has been wearing and is wearing in the current films. We have experts on each of the James Bonds. In fact, my buddy Alan, who I've known for a while, he's actually commissioned to have a scuba suit made for him, just like the scuba suit that James Bond wears in Thunderball. I mean, that is really taking men's clothing and couture to the next step. And so, I have these wonderful panelists going. Fleming himself was not a big one when it came to clothes. In fact, he tried to live as casually as he possibly could, wore a lot of shorts, wear a lot of shirts without ties. And I don't think that he was the man about town that he created with this character of James Bond. If you read in the books, he's very specific about the clothes that Bond wears, and then later, of course, Connery and the others. But I also want to put in a plug for a man by the name of Terrence Young, who directed the first two of the James Bond films, and then, later participated in the series. Terrence Young was a men's man. He was involved with a lot of women, and the women loved the way he dressed. And he also was very much involved as what I would call a bon vivant. He knew proper wines to order, he knew the right clubs to go to, And when they began the James Bond series, Connery was coming basically as this urn to be filled with lots of information. And he had been in a couple of movies, but he was not a classic guy. In fact, he still spoke with a heavy brogue, which he had to work on. He had been polishing coffins for a living, and a hell of a thing to do. And he had no idea what clothes to wear and even how to wear clothes. And so Terrence Young came along. He brought him to his Savile Row tailor, which was Anthony Sinclair, and you guys will be giving more details about that. He bought a few suits for Connery, and the one story that we're told about his relationship with Connery is he was like a father working with a son, almost like a mentor. And he took Connery to the right clubs, and he told him how to speak properly, to enunciate his words, how to play different games of cards and different games of chance. And the one story that I like to tell about Connery is he bought Connery one of the suits from Anthony Sinclair, and he says, I want you to go home, I want you to put that suit on, I want you to sleep in that suit. Now, amazing, why would you tell somebody to sleep in a suit? It's going to get all wrinkled. But what he wanted to do is he wanted to get Connery so comfortable in that clothing, because this was totally foreign to Connery, so that, if he's sleeping in a suit, he's going to be comfortable. So, comfortable wearing that suit in, the daytime during his work hours and of course, as Bond in the films. And I'm not going to say anything more because these guys have loads of stories and information about the right clothes to wear. And, we need to have more of these kinds of panels talking with our younger millennial fans about what to wear and how to be a gentleman, and maybe things would be a whole lot different. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Alan, maybe you want to start by introducing yourself, and go with Matt and so on down the line. And
Sure.
Okay.
Well, my name is Alan Howard. I'm from Dallas, and I've always liked pretty decent clothes. I had, some excursions into some weird stuff back in the 60s, but, and I got to the point where I had stuff, and I started looking at it as a quality of it, and started wanting to kind of upgrade it. And I found my resource here, Matt, and his website, where it had all this good stuff on the Bond. The Bond was always very impressed, and one thing led to another, and I kind of became a hobby with getting this stuff now. So quite fun. And I always tell people, Bond isn't really cosplay, because I wear this stuff all the time. I don't wear it when I go to Dragon Con for a couple hours, but it's fun to wear. So in the old days, when you went to the airport, you got on the airplane, you always kind of wore a suit, because the saying was, you never know who you're going to meet on the airplane. Might be your next job interview. So, and then there's Matt.
I'm Matt Spazer. I have a website that's called the Suits of James Bond, where I've spent years of research to write about all of James Bond's clothes and what makes them so special. And I've now, I dress the part. I try to always think about what James Bond would wear when I get dressed. But I've learned from James Bond, and I tried to make it my own. And I think that's important, because none of us in this room are James Bond. And I don't think that we have our own ways of dressing that work best for us. And I think that's also important. So I think it's important to look at what James Bond wears and then see how it best works for us. Because actually, if you are dressing just like James Bond, it kind of is actually cosplay.
Well, yeah.
I think it can be.
Well, because and if you're going to do that, like James Zarisky's got a lot of money from these collectors, and he goes and buys that Tom Ford suit that he was wearing. I'm not quite in that tax bracket, but you can get away with a lot of changes on that stuff to make it fit you.
Yeah, I think that's important. And Jason?
My name's Jason Merrill. I run a company called Blackbird Finery, where I sell vintage gentlemen's accessories. And I speak across the country on vintage gentlemen's accessories and etiquette. And just like some of what John said, the fact that we really do need to bring back dressing nicer, acting nicer, and just presenting yourself in a manner which is comfortable to both yourself and the rest of the public. But these guys are the real experts on the Bond stuff. Everything I know about what James Bond wore, I learned from this guy's website. So I should be just taking notes.
Well, we all have something to offer. I don't have the experience of wearing the old styles as much as you have. You have that, and I think what you show is that you can actually wear a lot of what James Bond used to wear, and today you wear much older things.
Yes.
And
this suit was custom made for someone in England in 1967. So it's 50 years old, just like I am. But it's a full three-piece wool.
Could you stand up so
Yeah.
I can see it?
But it's a full three-piece wool English city suit. It's heavy, but it is comfortable in pretty much all climates. I've worn this pretty much every season of the year.
You have to stand.
Sure. So,
it's a beautiful suit.
so it's got built-in suspenders that you don't normally see. It's got a built-in watch pocket here in the waistband of the trousers. I just don't have the proper fob to wear with the watch that I do wear. That's what's, yep.
And actually, this suit is much more typical of what people were wearing in the UK in the 1960s.
This is what a banker or someone would wear.
James Bond was wearing quite a bit different style. That was the three button. The three button was the standard style in England in the 60s. James Bond was with the two button style in the 60s.
No.
So the back of the trousers, they have those ones that are kind of dovetailed where the suspenders attached. Are those like that?
It's yeah. A little bit.
Not quite though.
Okay.
It's
Not quite.
It's not the full fishtail.
No. It doesn't come up that much higher.
So we have the forward-facing pleats, which are the style that Sean Connery wore. The English style of pleats.
Tie's a little too long, but he did the
You
same.
can tuck in your tie.
And this is a knitted silk tie, which is what Connery wore.
In Goldfinger, he wears these ties. In his other movies, he wears this grenadine tie, which is a much. It looks very similar. It has a very
Yeah,
similar
it's got the
texture.
same texture, but that I'm sure is much thinner.
This is a much thinner tie. This is constructed like any ordinary tie would be constructed. It's folded. It has a lining. It has a tipping at the bottom, and it's a more formal tie than the knitted. The knitted
Yeah,
works.
this is fairly casual.
The knitted works, but you can dress it up with a three-piece suit, and that's fine. George
Exactly.
Lazenby did that in his James Bond movies. So did Sean Connery in Goldfinger.
And one of the things I like is, as formal as you get, you can always add at least one casual component, and you still look absolutely dressed appropriately. I end up wearing a lot of jeans with a waistcoat and a tie and a blazer. Nobody ever notices the jeans.
Well, see, people are going back to the 30s now, I get some of this stuff. The thing that always tickles me is you can look at the stuff that Sean Connery wears in the first couple of movies and wear that today, and he looks just fine. Now, some of the ones that get a little more fashion forward, it gets dated. But he sticks with pretty much classic men's style. Like I said, the lapel with the thing like that, maybe a little variation. You wear that today around town and nobody bat an eye.
Yeah. This works from, say, 1920 on up, because it's such a classic style. Yes, number of buttons may differ, the width of the lapel may differ, but it's still very recognizable as a suit that's worn under certain circumstances.
All three of us are wearing clothes that you can really wear in any time in the past almost 100 years. So basically, since the 1930s, these styles they've changed. But things kind of revolve around these basic styles of what we're wearing. I think what all of us are wearing are pretty much kind of well-balanced styles, and that's something that James Bond is often aimed for. James Bond will, he does go into more fashion-forward styles, like some of Roger Moore's flare trousers and wide lapels. But what I'm wearing now is I'm wearing a blazer that's fairly similar to what Roger Moore was wearing in the late 70s, except it doesn't have the ridiculously wide lapels. But the hopsack wool is the same as what Roger Moore wore. It's a basket weave wool. It wears well in warm warm weather, and that's what Roger Moore wore his in Sardinia or in Venice. And then I think that I mean, right now in fashion, the blue blazer with the traditional metal buttons is not very popular. Although a blue jacket is definitely still popular. So what I do with my jacket is, instead of having metal buttons, I have these very shiny smoke mother of pearl buttons, which I know they look like metal from back where you're sitting, but they have a very similar effect. And this kind of brings it up to a little more.
Got one of the wrist too?
Oh yes, yeah, four here. And so I put these on my jacket myself about 10 years ago, and they have that classic blazer effect, but they make it a little more modern and more wearable, I think, for younger people today who might be a little afraid of wearing the traditional blazer with metal buttons. They might find those to be a little old-fashioned, but they can still work well.
Blazers actually started, there's a whole big argument on where the name came from, like was it HMS Blazer or whatever. But a lot of these in England, you'll see these guys with these really loud striped stuff that are sports clubs. And you can take these and like, it actually, like blue jeans on with them and stuff. Blazers are very versatile. And I've got one now, and I want to upgrade it. And that's actually the next thing I was looking at was a blazer. We were talking about the button selections and stuff. But blazers, that's what Roger Moore liked blazers a lot, because with gray pants, tan pants, you can do all kinds of things with a blazer at work. I mean, Roger Moore is kind of like the king of blazers. If you look at all those movies, he's got double-breasted, single-breasted, all kinds of stuff. It's a really versatile kind of a garment.
He wears blazers in 5 of his 7 Bond movies. So Sean Connery also wears a blue blazer in 3 of his Bond movies. So here's Brosnan wears it, and George Lazenby wears the blazer. It's a very, when it's in navy blue, especially when it's double-breasted, it has that really naval look. And James Bond is a naval officer. It's the perfect look for James Bond.
Well, Largo has one, which is kind of interesting because it's an 8-button one, and they're like military. They're straight down, or most of them, the top 2 buttons come out. And I was talking to somebody about working. We get one of those, and you have to have it custom made because nobody makes 8-button blazers like that anymore.
Prince Charles wore one too.
Yes, yeah.
So it's really you can really have fun with these styles. There's no rules. Things should look balanced. I think a lot of design in clothes is about balance, and things should all work well together. And even within a single piece of clothes, there should be a balance. That's why, I think it's one reason why you have buttons on both the cuffs of your jacket and in the front. It really balances the look. It echoes. And that's an important thing to think about with clothes.
You had to do all these visa applications, and people forget that when you're visiting other countries, you have to do that. They can say, you know what, we're not letting you in, and that's life. But here, everybody has the right to just come in.
Right, yeah.
So
come on in, go to the hospitals.
So we read this story, and I'm saying, so what's going to happen?
Yeah.
You know,
It'll be interesting.
and I have friends at ICE, and I'm like, when I get home, I'm going to send emails going, what do you think about this situation?
Right.
Is there going to be a back down, or they're obviously protesting the wrong way, but you can't tell them that. So what do you do?
Right.
And I just think, everybody can say what they want about Trump, but the one thing he campaigned on, and I think the one thing a lot of Americans want, is secure borders for this country.
My opinion, now you might say, well, you're nuts. Haven't you seen the news? Islamic State's all over the news. They're beheading all these people, and there's truth to that. But Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula has the bomb-making capability. They're the ones who go after airliners, infrastructure, and we've been able to successfully catch them. We've basically stopped 2 plots in the last 3 years, and we're still looking for the primary bomb maker, Brahimi, from Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula. That's why we spend a lot of time doing drone strikes and sending intelligence officers into and around Yemen. And so you can look at that, and then you can look at climate change. Whether you're on the left or the right politically, climate change is changing, literally, the landscape of places like Africa, Southeast Asia, which has second and third order effects. You have a water shortage right now in Africa that we have to be concerned with. And the reason why is because if there's water shortages in the next 10, 15 years, what do you have now in Africa? You have war. You actually have declared war. You have people who now look around to their government who have no water, and they say to themselves, you know, this Islamic State recruiter that came to the mosque the other day, maybe there's something to this, because it's not working for me, because I don't have any water. So that's that second and third order effect. Another thing that global climate change is impacting is where nature and human beings meet. So if you look at places like Africa, where you have herds and migrations of animals, and you look around for about the last 10 or 15 years, and you talk to researchers who study this, and they say, you know, if you look at the migration patterns of bats, for example, in South Sudan, it's changing because you have villages moving further and further into their areas. Well, the problem is that you have people going into areas mixing with animals that have viruses that we have not yet seen before. Ebola, 1976, Nazara came into contact because people were pushing further and further. So that's that second and third order effect. And then, of course, you look at the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. What keeps a lot of intelligence professionals up at night is what? North Korea transferring a chemical munition to Al-Shabaab or Al-Qaeda or Islamic State. So the whole point of this for the last 10 minutes is to talk about all these different threats. Now imagine if you're in the intelligence community. Do you think we have 25 James Bond running around? Do you think we have thousands of drones in the sky? Do you think that every satellite we have up in space can see wherever we want to, whenever we want to? And the answer is what? It's all fiction, it's all nonsense. So if you're in the intel community, and I used to be a collection manager, so you have to make decisions. I've got a requirement from the president, I've got a requirement from the Secretary of the Navy, I've got a requirement from this, I've got a requirement from that. And so you have to balance those requirements with the assets that you have available. And so we have to prioritize. And so that's why it's always interesting talking to people in the audience about what they think. Because there's so many different views. Because all are legitimate. I can make the argument that terrorism is a significant threat. And he may agree with you or not because he was in law enforcement. He knows these guys. He's dealing with these individuals. He's dealing with the Facebook, you know, posts and do I talk to this guy? Do I arrest this guy? Can I arrest him? What can I do legally? Well, anyways, Into the Shadows is my series, and I think most of you are familiar with it now. The impetus to the series was I was giving a lecture a couple years ago to my graduate students, and we were talking about Islamic State, and we had just talked about the Ebola virus, the outbreak in 2014, where if you remember what happened in West Africa, all in all, after about a year, there were about 29,000, we'll call it 30,000 people who were infected with Ebola. 12,000 are documented to have died, and if you recall from what happened in the United States, I think we lost three individuals, 2 or 3 or 4. And so it was a really big scare. And so I was in the classroom, we were talking, and I said, could you imagine if for one moment the Islamic State, this was when they declared their caliphate, this is when you saw that infamous picture of al-Baghdadi in the Mosul Mosque in 2014. That's where he declared we have an Islamic State now. I said, could you imagine if these guys come up with a plot to introduce Ebola in the United States? So one of the graduate students, an older guy, he's like, oh, come on, sir. I mean, if Ebola came to the United States, we wouldn't lose that many people. I said, you're absolutely right. We have the infrastructure. We wouldn't have tens of thousands of people getting infected, or we wouldn't have hundreds of people dying. We might have a few, but the psychological impact of that would be enormous. Because if you recall, remember the first case of Ebola in 2014? Yeah. CNN, Fox, we were all scared. Yeah. Oh my gosh, we have Ebola. It's coming. Oh my goodness. And we were all nervous. I mean, can anybody tell me that we weren't a little bit nervous?
People wearing masks.
In New York. Yeah. In New York City. And so
that's because the information wasn't out there for people to know that
that's true too.
Straight as well.
That's true too.
You know, I have an interest in, I've read Richard Preston's book, The Hot Tub,
yeah.
so I understand.
Very
I have
good.
some understanding of how it works. I'm sitting here telling everybody I know who's in panic mode. You don't have much to worry about. This is not how this works.
Yeah, you're not going to have a huge outbreak.
But the media didn't say that.
Right.
That's true. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was the impetus to my first book, which is called Into the Shadows of the Fever. And I have a funny story about that. I think I was telling Matt the other night. When my book got contracted, it was Into the Shadows, Black River. And it had a different cover. And to make a long story short, right before, Laura and I were talking about this, at the time, and it was just, they drove me nuts because the publisher was like, hey, we're getting really good feedback from the big buyers at Barnes & Noble. I think she mentioned Books A Million too. Not the bookstore owners, like the regional buyers, like the ones that buy, 1,000 here, 2,000 there at a time. But your cover sucks and they don't like the subtitle. I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right, well, that's great. So then I'm like, okay, so what are we going to change it to? Well, what kind of ideas do you have that we can give along? Make a long story short. We changed the cover. I don't have any books here left. We're on a fourth print run now. But what Into the Shadows of Fever is about, it's the start of a series where the main protagonist is a guy named Michael Brennan. He is a CIA non-official cover officer. All right. If you heard me talk yesterday, I talked about the difference between an official cover and non-official cover, and the introduction of his partner, Alif Tehran, who is a female Mossad agent. And so basically what ends up happening is they are informed that there is a potential plot that Islamic State is doing something somewhere in the United States, and that's like really legitimate, the vagueness of something like that. It's kind of like prior to 9/11 when Bush was told by Mossad, there might be something coming. Well, that doesn't mean anything 4 months prior to 9/11 when you have, that's literally what we got. That's all I can talk about. That's literally what they said. There's something that they're planning to do. Well, what the heck does that mean? Does that mean Portland? Does that mean New York City? Well, anyways, so Alif and Michael partner up, and basically what Into the Shadows of Fever is, it really looks at tradecraft. It looks at how the intelligence community is organized, how information is passed from what we call sensor to shooter, or in this case, to the asset. And so what I try to do is, the book takes place in about 7 or 8 different countries, and within those countries there are usually several different spots. One of them is Jamaica, where actually when I was doing the research, I remember this is where one of the James Bond books was held. I can't remember. It was Port San Antonio. Port San Antonio is in this book, and I was like, oh my God, there's the hotel. So I put it in my book. So I was like, okay, I'm not stealing anything. But anyways, so Into the Shadows is so the main story without, and I'm going to do a little reading here for you if you're interested. It's about their adventure, really, trying to capture an Islamic State terror group, where you have a guy named Manjo and Fode who are trained in Africa, in Sierra Leone. This guy, Manjo, is recruited by the Islamic State after the death of his father because of the Ebola outbreak. And so I talk a little bit about how Islamic State recruits people, what motivates somebody to join a terror group. Not a lot of detail, but enough for you to like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then basically it's their journey from Sierra Leone across the Atlantic. And I used all timelines, distances, sailing techniques, everything. So they get to Cuba and Jamaica, and they spend some time there. And it's really just Michael and Alif working together to find them, using satellite intercepts, using imagery. We were talking last night. I've got a group that a lot of people don't know about. It's called Joint Interagency Task Force South. Well, their primary mission is not to find terrorists. Their primary mission is to find narcotics, narcotic trafficking, routes, distribution, among some other things that JIF does. And so I was like, okay, well, wait a second. If I've got a CIA knock who now is being told, hey, you just missed the guy by a couple of days in Sierra Leone, we got to get you over to the Caribbean. I need some assets to track this boat. Well, where do I go? Well, we don't really have a lot of satellites overlooking South Florida. We think we do, but we don't, because of camera angles and focal points and all this other technical stuff we can't get into. But the bottom line is like, okay, so where do I go? So I go to JIF. Now, if you were to go to JIF now, whose headquarters is in Key West, they don't fly drones, at least that I'm not aware of at this point. They may have some smaller drones, but not the bigger drones that are used in the book. But the point is like it shows that cooperation among the intelligence community. This is not a James Bond saves the world kind of a book. And I did that consciously because there's already enough of those characters and there's enough of those storylines already out there. What I want to do is I want to engage you, thrill you, and give you a compelling story that you look at it and go, you know what, this was a fucking great story. I enjoyed it, but I learned something.
What became particularly fascinating, and this is where our presentations really work out, is that the details that Fleming included in 1956, especially about things like the description of the boardrooms, which, Jenny, you want to talk? This is your picture.
Sure. So my background's in German history and literature. So this is actually when I was living in Berlin. This is the Stasi headquarters in East Berlin that Ministry for State Security. He comes to police, and this is their boardroom, which they preserve in that museum. And if you look in that cabinet on the left-hand side, you can actually see this massive recording device. That it's all set up, they're ready to go. And I remember too, when I was reading that scene from Russia with Love, that's exactly what I saw when I was visiting Berlin. And I also put up this woodcut. It says, you can't say it's in Cyrillic, it says KGB NSF 1950 to 1985. It's a little flash from the KGB, which is pretty scuzzy. It's the 35th anniversary of friendship and collaboration. So to make the point that what Fleming is describing, the Soviet context, you see the future in the same way.
And his concern with accuracy, too, becomes very abundant in his personal correspondence. So there are a couple instances where two fans in particular wrote to him about going, "You got Moscow wrong." Or, it was a combination of, the location of what he described is not exactly it. And the responses he gave to his fans, one, how awesome is that? He wrote them back. But two, is just like, he wanted to clarify where exactly he got this information and apologize for getting it wrong. And it actually seemed to upset him. And so while he would totally admitted that, his plots were fantastic, what he said here too in an interview actually with Playboy around the time of From Russia with Love's publication was that he said every now and then, he's like, my plots are fantastic while they are often being based on truth. They go wildly beyond the probable, but not, I think, beyond the possible. Every now and then there will be a story in the newspaper that lifts a corner of the veil from Secret Service work. A tunnel from East to West Berlin so that our Secret Service can tap the Russian telephone system. Krabs frogmen exploit to examine the hull of a Soviet cruiser. The Russian spy Kopolov with his cigarette case that fired dum-dum bullets. This is all true Secret Service history that is yet in the higher realm of fantasy, and James Bond ventures into this realm are perfectly legitimate. So, fans of Ian Fleming know that he did incorporate a lot of his personal experiences into this fiction, with that wonderful imaginative embellishment on it too. But I think with this novel in particular, the emphasis on the historical accuracy is really quite fascinating. And so, he had a letter to David Wood here, again apologizing, talking about the accuracy there, and another gentleman, W. Ross Napier, Esquire, wrote to him about, you're getting these details wrong, and I was very upset about that. So we know, Smersh really did exist, right? And we know in the novel he also makes references to the Cambridge Five. But then the elements, the whole plot, right, is that, Bond is there's this female character, Tatia Romanova, who is supposed to fall in love with Bond and get the Spectre machine, of course, right? And this was something that critics, particularly like Umberto Eco, was just like, this plot is just science fiction. No way this could happen, right? And Michael Denning was also, this is just a quote was like, manifest absurdity is how he described the plot of From Russia with Love. But as we have since really found out, honey traps were a real thing that they used pretty regularly. And this is how they would recruit spies, this is how they would get information. And so while I was researching this project, I came across 3 examples of real deal honey traps and how the Soviets had used them. And the first one has to deal with this woman here, who was, you can note that for me. Okay. Yeah, she was known either as Lisa or Vixen. And what happened was in 1929, Stalin was getting increasingly concerned with his decision to not keep his rival Leon Trotsky in Russia, right? And Mikhail Abramovich Trissler, who was head of the foreign intelligence at the time, learned that while he was in exile, Trotsky had received a visit from a sympathizer from within the OGPU, right, named Yakov Blumkin. And Blumkin was willing to put Trotsky in touch with some co-thinkers out there in the USSR and sort of start undermining Stalin that way.